Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dennae Handford, and my wife, Dennae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. On the podcast with us today is Michael Dermer. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hi, Michael. We are looking forward to chatting with you today, and we'd like for you to get the discussion started by just giving us a little bit about who you are and your background and where your focus is right now as an entrepreneur.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. I am the founder and CEO of a company called The Lonely Entrepreneur, and The Lonely Entrepreneur is a lot of things, but the main thing we do is try to help entrepreneurs turn their passion into success, and we do that through an online learning platform and community, and a whole bunch of other things. But prior to that, I started my career as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer in New York City, left that to kind of pursue a passion of starting my own business, and started what got to be known as the first company in the United States to reward people for being healthy. It was a healthcare technology company that was venture capital backed that I sold in 2013, but not before, going through all the normal trials and tribulations, including a company that we built almost getting destroyed by the financial crisis, and turned out in a good result, like I said, in 2013 in selling it. And since that time have really been trying to give back to entrepreneurs through The Lonely Entrepreneur, through both profit and nonprofit activities. So that's what I'm doing today.
Well, I can already tell by your background as an M&A professional that you, in the M&A space, there's always tough decisions that are happening in that space, and it's happening at a very rapid pace. Yep. And then for you to be on the other side, from the attorney side as well as on the other side of the table in that merger and acquisition space, is going to be an interesting topic to kind of dive into. So I want you to first start us off and talk to us about a tough decision that you've had to make as an entrepreneur that didn't have that good of an outcome, and some of the lessons you learned through that tough decision.
Sure. As I mentioned, well, probably two tough decisions. One was I left a pretty prestigious law firm after 3 years and a lot of education to pursue, a startup. And that decision obviously in the end turned out to be great. But, we being the first company in healthcare to basically reward people for being healthy, we really had to fight the fight for many years, from the early 2000s to about 2000, 2008. In 2007, after we had really broken through, the early years of trying to convince the healthcare industry to reward people, which they had never done before. So 5, 6, 7 years of working hard. In 2007, I had a really, really significant offer to sell the company. And at the time, we had just, like a lot of entrepreneurs hope for, we had just really gotten to the point where we had a software technology business that was highly profitable. We were really starting to grow and scale. And you say to yourself, well, why would we ever sell the business now? And I won't mention the number, but it was a big one. And I decided, I remember in a board meeting in 2007 saying, no, why would we ever do that? And then almost a year later to the day, my, at the time, $60 million revenue business got cut in half virtually overnight by the financial crisis of 2008. All of my clients were the biggest companies in America that got decimated by the financial crisis. And so our $60 million revenue business went to about a $25 million revenue business in about a week.
Wow.
So I look back on that conversation in 2007. We were like, why would we ever sell the company now when we're have big EBITDA and growing and scaling and healthcare and technology and all that stuff that everybody hopes for? So that was, I don't reflect too much on that decision because it ended up having a great result in the long term. But that was one that at the time certainly didn't turn out great.
I'm sure that was a big punch in the gut that year later. But that's one of those things too. It's hard, and I wouldn't necessarily, that was definitely a tough decision, but I don't necessarily think you could look back and say it was a bad decision, because if you were given the same scenario today, you would probably still make the same decision, because you can't really predict what's going to happen a year from now,
Yeah, but the way it is, there's a reason why there's the C in the CEO title, right? You're responsible for that stuff. So whether you got it wrong, it's like a
right.
football coach always says, right? You are your record, right? So I appreciate the comment, but at the end of the day, if you really take ownership seriously, like, CEOs do, and of course we do as entrepreneurs, you look back and you make good ones and you make bad ones, and you just try to learn and get better from it.
So speaking of learning from this tough decision, what are some things that either you have done to change what you do moving forward with this kind of a decision that comes across you, or maybe, somebody that you're mentoring or something like that maybe that is facing this same thing?
It was really interesting going into that decision. My background, I was a college baseball player, an M&A lawyer, a boy. None of those things scream being humble and being a learner, and right, wrong, or otherwise, that whole experience humbled me in a way that I'm so thankful for, because you learn, especially like when you're an entrepreneur and you're hard charging and you have belief in your idea. Sometimes early on when you're inexperienced, you really look at not knowing things and not being good at things as weaknesses. And if you really bring the perspective that you have to get better at it every day, there's a humility and a desire for learning that comes from that really unlocks a lot of your best talent, as opposed to spending time on the things you don't know, just saying, how do I get the best out of everything around me? And then I would say, secondly, in that experience, what I really learned also is that if you're truly leading, you as the CEO, you as the entrepreneur actually should be, last in line at the buffet table. Your responsibility is to investors, employees, customers, vendors. And a lot of people asked me at that time, how did you deal with it? And I was like, it wasn't about me, right? I asked people to invest money in my company. I had 500 employees whose lives depended on it. So I think when you as the leader really say it's not really about me, it's about embracing the humility to learn and grow because you have a greater responsibility to the enterprise, that's really helped me grow personally, and I hope help the thousands of entrepreneurs that we interact with through the Lonely Entrepreneur grow as well.
And I think, what you had said is absolutely true in the fact that we as entrepreneurs and C-level executives need to understand that we have to take that responsibility. And when we go and ask other people's advice, whether it be a mentor or a coach or another, lateral person in the chain, it's one of those things that the ultimate buck stops with you. And you can get advice and people can tell you which way to go, but ultimately you're the one that needs to take responsibility and not sit there and try to play the blame game when things don't go the way you want them to go. Because if they go the way you want them to go, then you always take responsibility for those ones.
And listen, the ultimate day, it's about results, right? So if you take that seriously, it doesn't matter why you don't get there. And if it's because of our own lack of humility or ego which listen, you have to have ego to be a successful entrepreneur. A lot of times you get doors slammed in your face and it's a big part of it, but it's your ability to really embrace the journey and understand it's all about results and putting all those other things aside that really makes the difference, in my opinion.
So let's shift to a different tough decision that you've had to make that had a really good and positive outcome, or maybe an outcome that was better than you had expected, and a lesson or two that you learned through that one.
Well, it's the same kind of arc for me, because then after, my company almost got destroyed, we had 500 employees in 2008, and we spent the next 2 years, and we had a lot of choices to make at that time. A $60 million business is not meant to get cut in half overnight. If you have a 2-person business, it's hard enough that it gets cut in half. 60 million, you built up infrastructure and technology and staff and things like that. And we made the decision to double down. We said, listen, this is not just about money. This is about something we really believe in. We felt like we were making change to society. And so we doubled down financially at that time. We battled for 2 years, literally working 20 hours a day, every day, just basically save our baby. And after about 2+ years after the economy had calmed down, there was all this interest in healthcare in the US because it had been ignored during the financial crisis. And we got approached by a bunch of investment bankers at the time and got bought. So that's a decision that I'm incredibly proud of our company, of what we were able to do through very, very difficult times. Anybody who lived through those times, the analogy I like to use is that, before the financial crisis, you would make a decision where you'd say, I'm either going to go left on the street or go right on the street. And during the financial crisis, the street wasn't there. And so during those 2 years, I had a great deal of learning in the X number of years up to building that company. Those 2 years were like 20 years of learning in 2 years, because decisions that would have taken, months to make were made in hours because of what was going on around, not just us, but everybody. And what I really learned at that time was 2 really important things. One, it is your job, regardless of the circumstances, to be a thoughtful, deliberate, and unemotional leader. Doesn't matter what's going on. If you ever hear the stories of, Winston Churchill, in the middle of World War II when London was getting bombed. And they used to ask him, and he said, when you're going through hell, you just keep going. So really embracing that and trying to do it with a lack of emotion and being deliberate in making the decisions was an incredibly important thing that I learned along the way. And the other thing is, during those toughest times is when you really have to lead. And sometimes as entrepreneurs listening know, it's incredibly difficult to do that. I'll never forget a story where I knew that every day I had to come into the office, regardless of whether the world was collapsing around, not just our company, but really the economy, and keep my head high and make everybody believe that we were just moving forward. And I'll never forget, like years after we sold my company, one of my employees that had been with me forever said to me, Michael, during that whole time, we never once felt like we weren't going to make it because you always seemed like we were. She goes, but there was this one time that you were in your office and you pounded your hand on your desk. And it was only at that one time we didn't think we were going to make it. And I was like, really? One time in 2 years? And I remember like it was yesterday, it was a customer of ours that said, hey, listen, we're going to stay with you when all of our customers were going bankrupt. And then they called back a week later and said, we can't stay with you. The financials are just too bad. So anyway, you just learn that in the toughest of times is really when you have to lead, which is not always the easiest thing to do. But it was an incredibly life-changing experience, of course.
So, Michael, you've touched a little bit on, your mindset during that time and how you communicated some of that as a leader to your team. But were there any specific things that you did with your staff that you feel like just allowed you to constantly keep pushing them and keep going and keep them on board during that time?
Sure. It's a great question. I think that one of the most important things that leaders and entrepreneurs can do is simplify the journey through storytelling. I believe it's Colin Powell had the quote one time is that great leaders simplify. And I think during that time, if you remember, it was almost like being in a war zone, right, of things going on. And I think a lot of times through storytelling, you can simplify and cut through all the noise. If you think about things like Amazon, right, where Amazon said, listen, you're never going to buy a book in a bookstore anymore, and eventually you're going to buy anything from us. That paints a story, it paints a vision. And so we used to say, listen, Amazon told the world exactly what I just said, and they told Wall Street they would lose $5 billion doing it, and they lost $11 billion doing it, right? And when you tell stories like we were telling, we were like, listen, think about what we're trying to do in healthcare. We're trying to change the system, and you try to align it to other stories of people out there like Amazon that had not necessarily struggled, but had to invest so much money to get from point A to point B. That was definitely one thing about using stories to kind of simplify the message. The other was really all you can do is to not spend time on the what if's going to happen, right? As opposed to just going in and doing the work. The great analogy that we used to use all the time is if you ever seen the movie Apollo 13, where the spacecraft is damaged and Tom Hanks's character is trying to lead them to figure out all these procedures they have to take. And Kevin Bacon's character says, what happens if this goes wrong and this goes wrong and this goes wrong and this goes wrong? And Tom Hanks says, listen, we have 113 things we need to go right. We're on number 7, work the problem. So people, especially in a chaotic environment, get overwhelmed by, oh my God, what happens if all this stuff happens, right? So let's say you're a client service representative and you pick up the Wall Street Journal in 2009 and it says every company in America is going bankrupt. And oh, by the way, my 3 biggest clients were Washington Mutual, Countrywide Financial, and General Motors. 2 of the 3 of those companies don't exist today. And General Motors, as we know, was bailed out by the government. So imagine a client service rep reading the Wall Street Journal every day saying, wait a minute, all of our clients are going bankrupt. What you had to do is to just get them to work the problem. If you go in, work the issue in front of you, work the things that you can control, that's what actually makes you see progress. And when you see progress, that's when you feel as if the story arc that I was telling before is actually realizable, for lack of a better word.
I like that analogy and working the problem. I think that's a good way to just approach a lot of, the day-to-day issues. Can you share some strategies that you like to use when you are facing a tough decision?
I would say that it's different now than then, because decisions then had to be made, literally in 5 minutes without the information that you need. I think that there is, when it comes to making decisions, as I said before, I think being thoughtful and deliberate and unemotional. It sounds like a bunch of words, but that's a lot of times it's really hard for us entrepreneurs, right? We're very passionate about what we do. We have a belief in what we do. And a lot of times we're not bringing kind of the humility that we bring and the objectivity that we bring. So one of the things that I really encourage people to do is a lot of times when something comes across your desk as an entrepreneur, you're being influenced by these things we call the 4 Ps: passion, pressure, pleasure, and pain, right? And all those things make us kind of lose perspective. So for example, when they're under pressure, we have passion for our business, or we're feeling the pain of what's going on and all the ups and downs, simple decisions can become cloudy for us, right? So somebody will say, well, hey, I'm going to make new meatballs where I live in New York City. And somebody will say, no, wait a minute, there's plenty of meatballs. And you'll say things like, well, wait, not like my meatballs, right? We're not objective. So the same things when you're hiring an employee. Imagine when you're working 24 hours a day as an entrepreneur and you're going to hire your first employee. You'll take anybody, right? Because you're so overwhelmed that you're not objective about what you need. And sometimes you're not paying the market salary. So one of the techniques you can use is to use independent third parties that don't have the bias that you have, right? If you have a business idea, take it to somebody that you know that maybe isn't somebody that's so close to you, not your husband or your wife or your daughter or your son or your boyfriend or girlfriend who has a bias, but just take the idea to somebody who's going to be objective with you and can eliminate some of the emotion. The same thing's true with hiring employees, right? You're too close to it. A lot of times you could say, hey, we need a nuclear physicist, and the person across the table you're about to hire doesn't know anything about nuclear physics. Well, if you had somebody interview them that was smart, that you trust, but didn't have the emotional connection, they would come back to you and say, Michael, don't hire this person. They don't know anything about nuclear physics. So I think one of the things to do is to use these independent third parties as a way to kind of cut through some of the emotional things we feel, because these businesses are babies.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our show sponsors. When we come back, we'll talk to Michael about his favorites as it relates to his life as an entrepreneur.
Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HandfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HandfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HandfordCapital.com. All right, we are back with Michael Dermer. And Michael, I want you to start off this part of the episode on a series of quick questions and answers that we call the trifecta, and get us started by talking to us about your favorite technology that you use in business that helps make your life easier every day as an entrepreneur.
I really love a lot of the, kind of AI-based bot technology that exists. The ability to move quickly and easily through different of the service packages that entrepreneurs have to use to be able to get quick answers. I think that technology through AI just keeps getting smarter and smarter. So that's a big one that I use every day across a lot of different solutions.
What is a favorite quote that you've heard that has helped you as an entrepreneur?
It's really a quote from Martin Luther King, and it's the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And that is, obviously Martin Luther King was talking about it in the context of a much more important social issue, but it's something that entrepreneurs deal with, each and every day.
And what's a favorite book that you've read that's helped you make better decisions as an entrepreneur?
This is so out of left field for a lot of entrepreneurs, but I love The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I mean, if you look at the context for winning and losing and all the things that actually go into that, so many times as an entrepreneur, we feel like we're being reactive, right? Like, are we going to get hit by a truck or a bus or a car, right? As opposed to being able to proactive implement plans and strategies. I love The Art of War because it just shows you just how much, regardless of the resources you have, regardless if you have less capital or you're overwhelmed like an army, there's always things that you can do to get out in front of that. And so I love The Art of War. It's obviously not a short read, but.
Well, what's the next thing for you right now on your vision or your dream board, Michael?
We really want the Lonely Entrepreneur to be a brand that entrepreneurs say, these guys get it and provide me solutions to ultimately do what we want to do, which is turn our passion into success. And so what we've been trying to do is through the learning platform and community that we've created, everybody, probably would want to have an individual startup coach, but not everybody can afford it. And so what we're trying to do with technology, with our learning platform, is to create a massive community of entrepreneurs that can have a little better chance of success and improve what they're doing. And so that's what we're trying to do with the Lonely Entrepreneur. And so we offer that directly to entrepreneurs, and then we license it to organizations that are trying to help and empower entrepreneurs, both, like a bank trying to connect to an entrepreneur, but also nonprofit foundations and companies that are trying to empower entrepreneurs that perhaps can't afford a platform like ours. So we hope that people turn to the Lonely Entrepreneur and does what we say our vision is, which is to help them turn their passion into a success in a real measurable way.
And how can the listeners reach out to you, get more information from you, or maybe even try to see what you're doing with the Lonely Entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It's lonelyentrepreneur.com. And obviously we're available all over the place on social media on a similar name. The book, The Lonely Entrepreneur, is available on Amazon. But if you just go to lonelyentrepreneur.com, you can see us and get to know us a little bit.
And we'll put a link to that website on our show notes, which can be found at toughdecisions.net. Thank you so much, Michael, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. And I look forward to continuing to follow you as you continue to grow your business and growing the Lonely Entrepreneur, and look forward to having you on a future episode as you continue to grow as well.
My pleasure, and thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.